Hello, everyone. Welcome all of you once again to the Focus Weekly session for Ethics, Integrity, and Aptitude. We will pick up some of the newspaper articles from the last week and discuss them from the perspective of our ethics paper. The first article that we are going to discuss is this that the French court bars the far right leader from public office over embezzlement. Although the discussion will not be unique to this article, we had many articles in the last week and even before that of corruption in public office. And corruption is a topic which is the last topic of the syllabus, challenges of corruption. So, what impose this surmountable challenge of management of corruption? We'll try to understand that. And in the process, first we'll have to understand what is the concept of corruption and how shall we be looking at it in a broad way, especially for the paper of ethics, integrity, and aptitude. I'm going to give you an understanding of corruption that's going to explain it threadbare. Corruption is moral failure. It's the failure to impose morality in one's life. That's what corruption is. Corruption is dysfunctionality. For whatever purpose you have been designed, if you're not fulfilling that to the fullest, to the best of efficiency, you're not performing it properly, then that is corruption. In normal parlance, we say that the hard disk, the pen drive has become corrupt or the file has become corrupt because you can't open it, you can't use it. It has lost its functionality. It doesn't work as per the rules. The utility that used to come from it doesn't come anymore. That is corruption. To deteriorate something, to take away the vitality, that is corruption. And in the broadest sense, the vitality, the essence, the purpose of existence is to follow the rules and perform according to the expectation. And any limitation in that will be corruption. So, strictly speaking, corruption is failure of performance. But since the orientation of the GS paper 4 is such that we are talking in terms of performance of ethics, integrity, and aptitude. So, for this paper, I'm putting it like this that corruption is a moral failure. It's a rupture in the moral cosmic continuum. Something has broken, some balance has been taken away. It has become dysfunctional, it has become disbalanced. What? The entire cosmos. Anywhere in the cosmos, a disbalance has occurred, whether that the milkman putting milk in the water or the factories putting the 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 hydrochlorofluorocarbons in the atmosphere that is leading to the depletion of the ozone layer, whatever it is, the emission of methane accelerating the greenhouse gas, if a disbalance is happening anywhere in the cosmos, that amounts to corruption. Corruption violates the rules. The rules, as the word is in the Hindu and the Buddhist philosophy, is dharma. Dharma translates into maybe rules, orders, standards, principles. This dharma is not referring to religion. Religion is also made up of many rules, but dharma basically means standards, principles that leads to order. The same idea is of math in the Egyptian cosmic harmony, or the idea of natural law started by Thomas Aquinas. If there's violation of these principles, these standards that runs the universe, that means there is rupture of balance at any point in the cosmos. That amounts to corruption. Corruption takes away the universal order. So it starts with failure of morality or failure of principles and ends in disorderliness. Because order in the universe comes from rules. If you violate the rules, then will prevail disorderliness. So the end of corruption is chaos, it's disorderliness. But what you're doing in corruption is violating the norms, violating the rules. And when you violate the rules, you fail to comply, you fail to show your dutifulness towards the moral rules. That is corruption, and that will end in disorderly universe. As is there in Bhagavad Gita, when the righteous wither, chaos engulfs creation. It will engulf everything. Individuals, institutions, administration, society, nation, the entire world, the entire cosmos. It will engulf everything. So it begins like the small hole in the ship, like a thin edge of the wedge. But but it brings down the entire system. So there are two keywords, and this connection is essential. Rules, principles, standards, morality that leads to orderliness. But the failure of morality or moral failure will lead to chaos and disorderliness. So corruption should be seen as disorder. Cause of it is failure to comply, failure to show your duty towards following the principles. Corruption, as we generally think of it when we hear the term, is financial corruption or economic corruption, like embezzlement of public fund or tax evasion or resource hoarding. Of course, it is corruption, no doubt about it. But this is not all that corruption is. But this is also corruption primarily because it causes disruption in some part of cosmos, like hoarding public funds starves communities. It violates the principles of togetherness, of fraternity, of brotherhood. The idea of African philosophy, the bundled up together, is called as Ubuntu philosophy. It violates the idea of Ubuntu philosophy that I am because we are. This stability of cohesiveness, good relation, fraternity, brotherhood in society gets disrupted. And if that order gets disrupted, then that's corruption. So when you do this embezzlement of public fund, bribery, tax evasion, resource hoarding, it causes disorderliness, and that's a violation of some moral principles. It violates the distributive justice idea of Aristotle, or the idea of zakat in the Islamic personal laws, obligation to share wealth. It is violation of a principle of one kind or the other, and hence it is corruption. There are two key things to understand: moral failure, failure of some kind of morality, and the consequence of that is disorderliness, as we can understand in the context of financial corruption. According to Plato, wealth hoarded is wealth unshared, and it corrupts the soul and the state. We'll talk a little more about internal corruption and the corruption of soul in a bit, but hoarding the wealth, not sharing it, that's violating the distributive justice principle of Aristotle, will create chaos in the state. So, violation of rules and ending in chaos, that's what the nature of corruption is. According to Amartya Sen, poverty is not just lack of money, but it's absence of ethical institutions, lack of capability to access the services provided by institutions, lack of capability in the institution itself, meaning lack of ethical institution that leads to corruption. So when the institutions do not follow the rules, that's lack of ethical institutions. Not following the rules or the principles, any kind of dharma, standards that amount to corruption. But that's not all that corruption is. Corruption could also be in sense of environmental imbalance, failure to follow the ecological principles, like illegal deforestation, pollution leading to global warming, ozone hole depletion, etc. It violates the natural law of ecological interdependence. It violates the rules. And when you violate the rules, then there is disorderliness. It violates the rules. And the word for that in the Hindu philosophy is reet. The word reet in the Vedic thought means the rules, the principles that govern the entire universe. The similar idea in Taoism is yin yang, the interdependence of various beings, animate or inanimate. Yin yang, or the concept of reet in the Vedic thought. And nature works with reet or yin yang. And if you violate this reet, this natural law of ecological interdependence is part of reet, then there is chaos. There's chaos. You follow the principles like ahimsa, talked about in Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist ethics, or stewardship, the duty to protect creations, all creations in the Abrahamic religion. So we are violating the principles, and hence there is chaos. So in that way, we should be looking at corruption and the issues of pollution, degradation of environment. That's also corruption. There could be context of corruption, social and political context. and judicial bribery that's running in news lately, election rigging, hate speech. They are also corruption in the context of society and polity. They cause cosmic disturbance. It breeds cynicism. It fractures the collective conscience of society. According to the French legal philosopher Durkheim, it's very important to have collective conscience. And hate speech, he was a philosopher, worked on the philosophy of language and mind. And hate speech does destroy it. It's a kind of corruption because it brutalizes the collective consciousness of society. It raptures any part of cosmos that would lead to corruption. It violates the principle of satya, truth, important element in Hinduism. It violates the principle of fiduciary duty. If you are engaging in any kind of bribery, that's an important part of social contract theories. All theories of social contract, one also given by John Locke. The idea of basically this is age-old idea from the Vedas, but also known in the context of Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy. A polity built on untruth cannot sustain Ram Rajya, cannot sustain the cosmic order, cannot sustain the kingdom of God on earth, Ram Rajya. So the point I'm trying to make is when you violate a moral principle of any kind, that will obviously result in fracturing the cosmic balance of one sort or the other. That will amount to corruption. You can have cultural corruption, like media propaganda, some kind of academic fraud, cheating, IPR violations, discrimination, and that leads to distorting public opinion, eroding intellectual integrity, erosion of ethical norms in society, like norms of inclusiveness, norms of equality, norms of justice. It creates a rupture, a fracture in the cosmic balance because you're violating principles. What principles? Principles, dharma, the idea of li, the ritual propriety in Confucianism. And that would lead to disruption. Well, you violate the rules and you will end up in chaos. In Plato's allegory of cave, that we might have discussed at some point in the previous discussion, normalizing corruption desensitizes society. And there's a very famous quote of David Dark: we become what we normalize. And we cease to see the truth. We cease to see the reality beyond what is shown to us. We become insensitive to the reality and to truth. And this kind of thing actually disrupts our rationality. It disrupts social progress. It disrupts progress of humanity. It disrupts the success of nirvana, success of moksha. We get trapped in the cave of ignorance, ruled by tyranny of ignorance. So you have to understand that it's not when you add water in the milk that creates a disbalance in the content, the nutritional level, the carbohydrate and protein level of the milk. Ideally, the pH level of the milk, everything changes. And when you cause that disbalance, of course, that's corruption. But we understand that. We understand intuitively that's corruption, but you have to understand corruption in the form of creating chaos, disorderliness because of violation of rules, because of creation of misbalance. That's what exactly corruption is. There's a very famous quote of Lao Tzu: when the great way is abandoned, great way could also be the long way, the long road, as Socrates used to say, the long road to ethics. When the great way is abandoned, justice and morality arise, or it may seem to arise, but so do hypocrisy and strife. Strife, confrontation, conflict, war, violence, death, tragedy. Everything comes along with it. So when you violate ethical norms, you are doomed, you are destined for chaos. So violation of ethical norms, not just professional code of ethics and the legal norms, any law, any standard, in broadest sense, failure to practice morality is corruption. The instances that I've shown you, those are very evident and they are external. But getting too angry, that's also corruption. Because our understanding of corruption is disbalance. And when you have excessive anger, then there's a disbalance. According to Plato, there are three parts of the soul: reason, emotion, and desire. And emotion and desire and reason all have to be checked by one another. Reason has a great role to play in checking emotion and desire, and also gets informed by emotion. But reason must guide emotion and desire. And excessive emotion and excessive desire has to be controlled. Because if emotion becomes excessive, it will be at the cost of reason and desire. If this part of the soul becomes excessive, it will impinge on the space of reason and desire. So, in anger, you can do anything. You can throw up your phone, so you become low on your desire. You don't want to keep your phone, you are ready to break it and throw on someone's head. And that's limitation of your reason. You do not understand the consequence of that in the moment. So if emotion increases, both reason and desire will decrease. So that's disharmony, that's imbalance within you. And if you're becoming excessively angry, excessively desirous of anything, then that is also corruption. It creates disharmony in the soul. It disrupts, then the effect of that is seen outside, and it disrupts the Rita yin yang. It replaces the harmony with chaos externally because of unchecked aggression. So that's not good. That's not good. It violates the principles of ahimsa, principles of satya, principles of karuna, compassion. It starts getting aligned with devesh, anger. It's one of the three poison in the idea of Buddhism, and that perpetuates suffering. The other two is delusion and greed. One of the poison is anger. According to Aristotle, excessive anger clouds reason. And this also has become the modern psychological principle. If you have excessive of any emotion, that is going to cloud your reason. It's a psychological principle. So if you see, when you become too angry, you're violating some principle, and that is leading to disharmony of your soul, that results in disharmony of society because of unchecked aggression. So is it corruption to be too angry, too greedy, too lustful, having too much of hate, intolerance? Our answer is yes, that is also corruption. Corruption is not taking bribe. Corruption is also having any kind of disbalance, and we're having disbalance in your soul. That is also corruption. Similarly, if you have excessive desire, that's also corruption. If you have excessive desire, then your emotion and reason both are going to decrease. You won't feel for other people. You just want to look at your self interest. Others are suffering and you are unmoved. You do not understand the consequence of that. Emotion and reason both are gone. So, in that case, that's also corruption because you have disharmonized your internal balance. That's also corruption. It violates the principles of apigraha, non possessiveness of Jainism, stewardship of Abrahamic religion, brahmacharya, self control in this phase of your life. That's the first stage of life in the Hindu philosophy. And that's going to create problem. It's going to create problem. It's violation of lobe, greed. It's violation of the social contract, according to Thomas Hobbes, perpetual and restless desire of power after power creates a state of nature, the state of chaos. So, chaos is the end result of corruption, and disharmony is the beginning of corruption. So, the long and short of what we have discussed regarding corruption is this, that corruption is antithesis of moral order. It could be economic, it could be environmental, it could be social, political, it could be internal. Corruption could be of any form. If you prevent justice, withholding of your wealth, that's corruption. If you defy natural laws by ignoring ecological limits and destabilize the Earth's equilibrium, that's corruption. If you degrade culture by normalizing vices, that's corruption. If you erode your own character by allowing the negative emotion and negative desire to flourish inside you, you do not keep a check on them using rationality, that is corruption. So to restore balance, society must align with dharma. Violation of rules creates chaos. If you want to have restoration of peace, removal of chaos, you'll have to follow the principles and recognizing that moral order is the foundation of cosmic order. Peace within, harmony within creates harmony without. So if you have moral order, if you have morality, practicing virtues, and that is the solution to overcome the problem of corruption. Combating corruption is not just a policy reform. It cannot be the case. It cannot be done just with the laws. It is a spiritual imperative. that needs to be developed inside us in terms of inculcation of virtues. And you have to take it as an imperative to heal the fractures in our moral universe, wherever it is. That's inside us, development of virtues. If that's outside, development of fraternity, brotherhood, social cohesion, good relations. If that's in the institution, rule of law. If that's in the constitution, amendment. If that's internationally, then conventions. You have to remove the fractures in the entire moral universe to solve the problem of corruption. It's not the issue of policy. So, in this discussion, we have tried to establish that corruption is moral failure, and moral failure leads to disorderliness, chaos. Now, there are two more questions. If that's the case, then what are the reasons for moral failure? Why do we fail on our morality? And then the next logical question would be how to fix it? How do we stop failing? How do we stop failing in practicing morality? So, why do we fail? We fail, maybe this failure is a matter of choice. We choose to fail. We do not want to practice morality. Why? We don't have ethics in us. Why? We are victim of excessive desire and emotion. We can't control our psychology, and we have not gone through enough socialization and persuasion and leadership. Nobody has tried to change us. Neither we have done self-reflection, critical thinking, and tried to find the purpose of our life. So we do not just know it. We are in the cave of ignorance. Tyranny of ignorance is ruling us for n number of reasons. We just do not have ethics in us. That could be the problem, and that could be the cause of failure. But as I've shown you in the syllabus, the topic says challenges of corruption. We have understood what corruption is, but why it is so challenging. It's very challenging because this failure sometimes is implicit and we did not know that we are failing. And yet we are corrupt. And, to explain that part, why do we fail in practicing morality? Failure, aligning with the title of the paper, could come because of three reasons. We do not have ethics in us. We haven't developed values. Inculcation of virtues has not happened, neither in schools nor in family, other educational institutions, professionally at workplace. We haven't done it through our own learning and education and developing literacy about virtues and developing the ethos through maybe the Supreme Court judgments or reading of the Constitution or our own critical thinking. We have not done a thing. So we have no ethics. So we are blatantly corrupt, blatantly corrupt. We take bribe and do embezzlement of money from the public fund, diversion of funds. We work with political, bureaucratic, corporate nexus. We allow lobbying. We're just satisfying our greed. Maybe that's our problem, which is very open to us, known to us, and yet we do it. That's a problem of ethics. There could be a problem of integrity. We are corrupt and we fail. We don't fail always, but we often fail. We often fail. We trip whenever the situation is difficult. The difficulty may be emotional difficulty. When our friend and family walk into the office, maybe we show preferences to them, we show favoritism, nepotism. We work with conflict of interest, meaning we bring our personal interest and allow it to conflict with public interest and also allow it to trump public interest. So we start satisfying our personal interest rather than working for public interest. Or maybe we follow the laws, but when we see the loopholes, we take the opportunity to get inside the creek that has been left by the law and go on the other side, having a shortcut. Whatever it is, it's a matter that we do follow the laws, but given the opportunity, we don't. Or sometime, occasionally, we don't. For our loved ones, we don't. For our family, we don't. That's a problem of consistency. We are not consistent with it. It's a matter of lack of strength, of conviction, lack of clarity, lack of moral conviction, lack of courage. And that leads to lack of consistency. So that's a problem of integrity. The third reason why we fail is we just don't have the aptitude in us. We fail not because we intend to fail. We're trying, but we are not having the aptitude, so we are failing. Maybe we are not having enough of creativity, so we just don't know how to use the fund. We do not know how to build more number of houses under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. New construction and design techniques just have not picked up. There are leakages in giving subsidies to the farmers and scholarship to the students. There are leakages. Why? Because e-governance has not been used. There are no innovative ideas to make the payment system leak-proof. Biometrics have not been updated. The, the popularization of JAM Trinity has not been done. You just have not done it. Maybe you cannot motivate your team members. You don't have the leadership in you. That could be the problem. You don't know how to communicate, how to persuade people. So because of your inability, because of lack of aptitude, because of lack of moral expertise, you are not doing enough. And since you're not doing enough, you're failing and performing your duty, a duty to create peace, happiness, prosperity. You're failing as a part of sovereign, as a civil servant in doing that. And that failure is also having the same result as the failure to comply with basic ethics. If you embezzle money out of the fund, then less number of people will get the benefit. Less amount of benefit will reach. But if you're not creative, not imaginative, not innovative with the same amount of fund, you could have brought more benefit, and there is an opportunity cost, loss of opportunity in doing that. And that's also corruption. Be very clear about it. That is also corruption. And there are some instances here in the PPT. You can read it for yourself, but I'll give you two instances, and the rest you can read yourself. These two are the common forms of corruption that we understand, but this is also a form of corruption that you need to understand. The form of corruption, for instance, there is a poor tax revenue collection in India. It's around 12, 13%, between 11 to 13%, which is low. A decent tax revenue collection should be 18% of GDP. Tax to GDP ratio should be around 18%. But that's low. And you understand, if that's the case, there'll be problem of inclusion, problem of less capacity with the government for social expenditure. That's a problem. And you do understand that that will lead to chaos. That will not lead to peace, because peace comes with justice, and justice is giving people their due. But you can't give people their due. Why? Because you don't have money. Public fund doesn't have adequate capacity. Why? Because tax revenue collection is low. Is that a problem? That's a real problem. For a socialist society, that's a real problem. So is it corruption? Of course, yes, it is corruption. It's corruption because it's creating chaos in society. People are not satisfied, people are not happy, protesting everywhere. People are unemployed youth, getting into all kind of nuisance. If you're rupturing the more cosmic order, that is corruption. What's the reason for this? The reason for this kind of corruption is lack of skill. For instance, in this case, lack of advanced assessment and auditing skills in the income tax department. And now they are improving it. They're improving it, of course, they're improving it. And now we're using the big data analytics and artificial intelligence. They're tracking it, especially when the digital transaction has taken up. It's easy to see the money trail. So they also send a notice. They also send you the Gmail as a reminder that you have not filed the income tax return. Please do. And this is the last date. So that is quite helpful. Of course, that is quite helpful. They're improving it, but so far it has not been the case. And that is the prime reason why the tax revenue collection is low. Now, who is to blame? Who will be punished? Will anyone ever be punished for this? This kind of thing is not easy to identify. It's not easy to quantify. It's generally not seen. These inefficiencies in the institutions are not absorbed by the people. But they are a real problem. They're the real problem. Low conviction rate. If you see cumulatively the civil cases and the criminal case, the conviction rate in India is very low, very, very low. It's around 40%. And this low conviction rate is a shame on the legal system. You understand, conviction rate is low. That means justice is denied. The accused goes scot-free. The victim, the justice is denied. And it is in justice that the ordering of society is centered, according to Aristotle. And you understand, if that will be the case, people will be having grudges. The society will remain unsettled if justice is not given. That will create problem. Of course, you understand that. What is the reason for this? The reason for low conviction rate has been pointed out to be lack of sound legal reasoning among the advocates and lack of evidence gathering skills by the law enforcement agencies. So many cases begin the trial because of lack of evidence. The accused goes scot-free. But whose job is this? Of course, you have to be very, very efficient. You have to have that skill in you, that expertise to collect the evidence. And if you don't have it, then the conviction rate will be low because all the evidence is not to be proved for the case, for the trial to begin. So the investigating officer can just give the prima facie evidence, prima facie. Judge has to be satisfied to give the permission for the beginning of the trial. And the trial begins. And the substantial proof has to be presented later on. But later on, there is no proof because you have not gathered the evidence or the legal reasoning. You have not done that sufficiently adequately. So khatam, the accused will go scot-free. Who is to blame? The poor aptitude of the civil servants, of officers, of public officers, that is to be blamed. So the failure to practice morality can come because you do not have ethics, or you may not have integrity, or you may not have aptitude. So our understanding now has matured a little bit. From the beginning of the video, we are trying to understand what corruption is. Our understanding is that corruption is moral failure. And this moral failure leads to disorderliness. Cause of moral failure could be three, aligning with the title of the paper, ethics, integrity, and aptitude. If anyone is lacked, then there will be moral failure. Now the cure comes from understanding the cause. But before we go to the cure, let me show you one question that UPSC has asked in 2021. Non-performance of duty by a public servant is a form of corruption. Do you agree with this view? Non-performance of duty is a form of corruption. From what we have gathered in the last 30 minutes, is corruption is failure to observe morality. And the concept of duty, non-performance of duty, the concept of duty comes from the concept of morality, rationality. You feel duty bound towards those things which are rational. And what is rational is also moral. So we have sense of dutifulness towards morality. So lack of performance of duty is moral failure. Is that corruption? That's the way we have defined it. Corruption is moral failure. Non-performance of duty is actually moral failure, because what is a duty? A duty is to give effect to morality as a civil servant. The non-performance of duty means non-enforcement of morality. These are the same thing, exactly same thing. And here in the answer to this question, I've given you certain points. This is the quote from what Gandhi wrote in one of the articles in Hind Swaraj in 1920s. Performance of duty and observance of morality are convertible terms. So if you do not perform your duty, then you do not observe morality. What's corruption? Corruption is moral failure. Non-performance of duty is moral failure. So is that corruption? Yeah. Non-performance of duty is corruption. Do you agree? Yes, I do. I do agree. But don't write like this, I do. You have to give reason. Reasoning has to be followed, has to be preceded by taking the stand. And you can take the stand later on, but first you have to reason on this. So non-performance of duty for various reasons, as has been given out here, is a form of corruption. But in order to be fair to a public servant, you also have to add some caveat. If the non-performance of duty is not because of the civil servant individually, in his individual capacity, and the nature of the work is such that it requires cooperation, but you're not getting one. Not getting cooperation from the entire system. Interdepartmental coordination is not there. Or maybe the geography is very difficult. There's some unforeseen crisis, maybe during COVID-19 pandemic. The socioeconomic indicators were not improving. But it's your duty as a civil servant to improve the socioeconomic indicators in your region. So there could be a lot of complexity. There could be problem of Naxalism. There could be problem of natural disaster keep coming in. And in that case, if you are not the reason for non-performance of your assigned duty, and you're trying your best, but you're not still able to perform quantitatively in terms of numbers, the socioeconomic indicators are not improving. So in that case, you're not corrupt. Corruption, in that case, you're not corrupt. Corruption is actually failure to observe morality. But you're observing the principles to the best of your capacity, but is beyond you That's also required for the overall performance of your office because it's a cumulative job. But if that is not there, interdepartmental coordination is not there, there is ambiguity in authority, there's conflict of your authority with some other officer's authority, there's non-cooperation from the political bosses, the resources are not there, the public fund is not there, or there is hostile environment, maybe geographically or socially, there's Naxalism or terrorism. There could be a number of things that come as a roadblock in performance of your duty, which you are not to be blamed for. So in that case, you're not corrupt. But you are the reason, if that's the case, not working for public interest, you're not inclined towards public service or dedication, you don't feel duty bound to citizens, you do not perform well. You're not innovative, you don't have leadership, you are missing the aptitude. Then, of course, you're the reason for corruption. In that case, you're corrupt. In that case, surely you're corrupt. But if you are not the reason for not performance of your duty or the results not coming in from your hard work, then you should not be seen as corrupt. After all, Buddha said, intention of an action is more important than the action itself. That's the point. So far, the line of thought has been like this. What is corruption? Corruption is moral failure. That leads to chaos, disorderliness. Now, why is there moral failure? We have seen that. How to fix it? How to fix it? You see, in 2023, UPSC has asked this question. Corruption is the manifestation of failure of core values in the society. Failure of core values. This is what understanding I have given you. Failure of core values. Values are building blocks of morality. I've given you the phrase moral failure. Corruption is moral failure. Moral failure meaning failure of morality. Values are building blocks of morality. Failure of values, same thing as saying moral failure, same thing, just choice of words. In the contextual statement here, UPSC is also telling us that corruption is manifestation of the failure of values in society. And that's how you should be actually looking at corruption. In your opinion, what measures can be adopted to uplift the core values in society? Meaning, what measures can be adopted to fight corruption? To fight corruption, you have to fix the fractures, the ruptures in the moral universe. And that fractures or ruptures in the moral universe will be fixed by inculcation of values. So, how to stop failing in practicing morality is to practice morality, meaning develop values. So, how to stop corruption? Develop values. That's the answer. And that's why Aristotle said that the purpose of life must be to inculcate virtues. Let's take care of things. Virtues, moral universe then gets aligned with the material universe as well. Now, how to do this? That's altogether a different discussion. How to inculcate values. We will continue with this story some other day. Otherwise, the discussion will become enormously long. But that's where the beginning of the solution would be. That's where our understanding of corruption was. Now let's take up another article. A bulldozing of 6 homes in UP's Prayagraj, inhuman and illegal. And that's a statement of Supreme Court. Supreme Court in adjugation of the case that was from 2001. The judgment has come lately, last week. And in that judgment, Supreme Court has made some important observations that we need to take a look at. As in the title of the topic of the article, this was inhuman and illegal. And the Supreme Court has asked the institutions to pay rupees 10 lakh each to the house owners as compensation for depriving them of their fundamental right to shelter. And there are some other important stuff in the article. And Supreme Court has reminded the authorities of rule of law. We have had discussion on rule of law last week as well. Rule of law still exists in this country. And the law under the Uttar Pradesh Urban Planning and Development Act of 1973 does give the power to the Urban Development and Planning Authority under Section 27 that if a house has been constructed illegally, then you can You can graze it, you can bulldoze it, you can bring it to ground after giving the notice. Once you give notice and sufficient time, only then the appellants will have opportunity to appeal. And that opportunity to appeal is an important principle under rule of law or the principle of natural justice. There are strong words used that will be of essence when we start the discussion and start to see the ethical issues in the article. Their conscience, the judges have said, shocked the conscience. If the conscience is getting shocked, it's a good sign. It means that you still have feelings and moral sensitivity. You can still sense it. And this was said in the context of a visual of little girl running with the books while the house was being razed down. So let's see what is to be discussed. This technically was a legal thing. The house is very legal. You see, if you see technically, the section 27 of Uttar Pradesh Urban Planning and Development Act allows the authority to graze down the house that is violating the master plan of the city. They have the authority to do it. But let us discuss then why the court has said it is inhuman, and still why the court is saying that it is illegal. Not that the law doesn't permit you to do it. The law permits you, but we do not follow the procedure laid down by the law. We follow the due process of the law. And it's there in somewhere in the article mentioned that this has violated the due process. So overall, what's the issue here and what are the observations made by the Supreme Court? Let's have a discussion on this, on the ethical dimensions presented out in the article. The first and foremost argument that you see in the article is that the right to shelter, that's integral to human dignity. That's part of Article 21, right to life under Article 21 of our Constitution. And the judges have said that bulldozing houses without due process, this is an important point, violates the right. We follow this principle of due process of the law, not the procedure laid down by the law. The due process. And the understanding of due process is to align the law with the principle of natural justice. And Supreme Court has said that this kind of action reduces individuals to objects of a state power rather than rights-bearing citizens. And that violates the Kantian ethics that human beings must never be treated as mere means, always as an end, and not as object of a state power. They must be treated as an end, right-bearing citizens. You cannot go away and take away their rights. You cannot do anything that violates their dignity, the principle of natural justice. And in the legal philosophy, the procedural justice and due process, the principle of natural justice holds immense importance. And in the article, the judges have told in the judgment, has been highlighted in the article, that fairness in governance requires transparent procedures. The issue here, as was highlighted by the government officer, is that notice was given. Notice was given, but the notice was fixed on their property. And judges have said that the pasting notices, instead of personally delivering the notice or delivering the notice in person, that's important. Pasting the notice and going away, that's not the way to deal with the citizens. The notice has to be handed in person in hard copy, and sufficient time has to be given. Once the notice was appended on their property, next day the grazing was done. And if you do it like this, there is no time to appeal. And if you do not give time to appeal, that violates the principle of natural justice. It violates the principle of Rawlsian fairness, of equitable participation in the working of the institutions. It was not an equitable participation because you cannot appeal against the judgment of the lower institutions. And that's not fair. On that ground, it was said that it is not just inhuman, it is also illegal because it's violating the principles of legal jurisprudence. Then in the article, this concept of restorative justice through the monetary compensation. Compensation of 10 lakhs per household has been asked by the Supreme Court to be given. This attempts to redress harm, of course, but the true restoration really depends on building the trust. When society gets restored and individual finds space to live with honor and dignity in that society. Monetary reparation will have limitation, but although this effort by the Supreme Court is commendable, but howsoever, the real justice should be restorative justice, not retributive justice or transactional justice. And compensation, that should not be just monetary. Compensation must acknowledge the emotional trauma or the loss of community ties as well. But practically, you understand there are limitations that the courts can do. Ethics in administration. That's the topic mentioned in the beginning of your sixth chapter, ethics in administration. And the judges have remarked that bulldozer culture is a systemic abuse of power. And authorities must not prioritize expediency over rights. This violates the idea of care, of trusteeship under social contract. The idea that state has to take care of citizens and not use this laws and that laws to harass citizens. John Locke, in his second treatise of civil government, has written many important points regarding how the laws should be formed and how it should be implemented. One of the statements from his second treatise is the end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. So the laws are used selectively. And in the judgment, the courts have highlighted that's the abuse of power. And the laws must not be to take away the right to shelter of people. It should not be used to abolish their rights. It should not be used to restrain their rights, to harass them. The purpose of the law is always to preserve and enlarge freedom, the rights of the people. It should not be used the other way around. Supreme Court in this particular judgment also have highlighted the last year's judgment where Supreme Court has condemned bulldozer justice, and the reference to that judgment has been made in this judgment as well. And where the judges have condemned arbitrary demolition, which reflects the Amartya Sen's emphasis on institutions as guardians of justice, not instrument of oppression. This also highlights empathy in governance, the invocation of shocked conscience. The judges have said that conscience have been shocked. This underscores the need of empathetic governance, which is a positive sign if you get shocked by these incidents. If it's a business as usual, like the officers who were overseeing the demolition, their conscience perhaps were not shocked, which is not a good sign. And authorities must balance the policy goals with compassion. Policy goal, of course, is development, and the master plan must be followed for a planned, harmonious, smooth functioning in the city. But that displacement has to be balanced out with overall happiness. In Bentham's hedonistic calculus or felicific calculus, there is a requirement of weighing all stakeholders' happiness. And happiness overall in society must be maximized. So if you're running about the legal clauses, Supreme Court in this judgment has said that that is weaponization of the law. The legality must run in parallel and under the shadow of morality. So you can say that, Lord, we are just doing the legal compliance with Section 27 of Uttar Pradesh Urban Planning and Development Act 1973. And this gives the power to the Urban Development Authority to graze down the buildings if it doesn't follow the master plan. Yes. Everything sounds legal. But that does not absolve the moral duty. And judges have asked the authorities to exceed the minimal level of legal standards to uphold the ethical governance. And this is a very important point. In the legal philosophy, it is said that the unwritten ethical obligations transcend the written laws. There's a very interesting question in this context that UPSC has asked in 2022. The rules and regulations provided to all the civil servants are same, yet there is difference in the performance. Why? The answer is given in the question itself. The positive-minded officers are able to interpret the rules and regulations in favor of the case and achieve success, whereas negative-minded officers are unable to achieve goals by interpreting the same rules and regulations against the case. So if you're doing the positive interpretation, the positive use of the law, then you get reform. Otherwise, that end up in weaponization of the law. The law does not work in isolation. Understanding and implementation of the law must not be in isolation of the moral universe. It must be done under the shade of morality. If it is not done in that case, then the question is teaching you that instead of good, evil will come out by following the rules and regulations. And then in the article, there's talk of erosion of societal trust. Arbitrary state actions erode public trust, of course. There is no consistency. There is no reasonable prediction of what the state can do. Trust is the bedrock of the social contract. In the social contract theories of John Locke, of Rousseau, there's a very important point that I've added up here. Demolitions without warning. It mirrors Hannah Arendt's very important concept, banality of evil. Banality means lack of novelty, something that has become mundane. You don't even think while doing it. That's banality. Banality of evil. When common people start to participate in evil, it has become so common, so unquestionable, so ingrained in your practices in the culture that everyone is doing it and nobody is questioning it. That's banality of evil. Bureaucratic indifference normalizes injustice. And that leads to fracturing of civic bonds and also disintegration of society. So if things become common, these kind of things goes unquestioned by the media, by civil societies, by bureaucracy, then we'll end up in banality of evil. Banality of evil is also moral failure. And like all moral failure, this will also end up in chaos. So the code asserted a rule of law, and that must transcend bureaucratic apathy. And if there's rule of law, only then we can ensure that power serves people, not vice versa. Now let's move towards the third article. Free speech is an integral part of healthy and civilized society. Supreme Court has struck down a case against one of the Congress MP, Imran Pratapgarhi. The case was that maybe in one of the public meeting or at the end of the rally, people gathered together in the some speeches. Then there was a video that was aired, maybe live or recorded. I'm not quite sure, of Imran Pratapgarhi. And in that address that he was doing digitally, he was not there present physically, he recited a poem. And that poem, based on that, a case was registered by the Gujarat police under section 196 of Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. And the thing was that the poem has incited animosity or hatred among different communities. That's the claim. And based on that, the provisions of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita was imposed, section 196. It was challenged in the High Court, didn't get relief. He went to the Supreme Court. And Justice Oka, he said that there's nothing wrong with the poem. Rather, the poem follows the principle of Mahatma Gandhi, ahimsa. But the Advocate General, Tushar Mehta, was not impressed. And he said that the poem at best is sadak chhap. This is the word he has used in the court, sadak chhap, meaning very cheap. And he objected to the comparison with Mahatma Gandhi. But I'll give you the opinion of Justice Oka as to how he replied to the Advocate General Tushar Mehta. Anyways, this case is quite similar to what we have discussed in last week and last week as well. The importance of free speech. Basically, this is what is of our interest. And the importance of free speech, why it is important, that I have already discussed with you last week. So pinpointedly on free speech, that discussion already has happened. But there would be some new learning through this article and the observation of Supreme Court judges. That's what I'm going to highlight here. Like the observation that freedom of expression that needs to be protected against the demand or the sense of insecurity from the majority. So in the name of social harmony, to check an animosity and to satisfy the insecurity of some section or group, freedom of speech and expression cannot be curtailed. That's the chief argument of the judge in the judgment. Free speech is foundational to democracy, but its limits are often debated in the context of maintaining social harmony. And the judges have said that the free speech can be restricted, but that restriction has to be reasonable. And restriction should not be such that it takes away the fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression. So it should not go to the extent, the restriction should not go to the extent that the right cease to exist. Restriction on freedom of speech and expression should not take away the right itself. And mere dissent or artistic expression does not inherently threaten communal peace. It does not inherently develop animosity. So the poem in question advocated nonviolence according to Justice Oka, invoking Gandhian legacy, ethically suppressing such speech under the guise of preventing enmity risk conflating critique with harm. That's gaslighting. And that undermines the John Stuart Mill's argument that free discourse is vital for societal progress. Last week, I've given you 3 arguments of J.S. Mill as to why free discourse is important and how it leads to societal progress. I hope you can gather it from there. In case you just want to check it up, you can go to the last week video. The other thing that mentioned in the article highlighted by the Supreme Court judges is that the state power must be under self-restraint, and the censorship should be resisted. This tendency of using the power in your hand to muzzle the voices and censor different activities, that must be restricted. The state role in regulating speech must balance authority with restraint. Overreach from authority risk authoritarianism. And the court has said Gujarat police case under the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita reflects a tendency to weaponize laws against dissent. See, there is a provision, and if somebody is creating animosity and enmity, that needs to be stopped, because fraternity is an important value that's mentioned in the preamble of Indian Constitution, and that needs to be maintained. But it should not be weaponized. It should not be used to muzzle voices. This idea and the stand that Supreme Court has taken in the case aligns with Hannah Arendt's warning about bureaucracies normalizing oppression through proceduralism. And we have talked about this procedural harassment also last week in the context of harassing using various provisions, comedians currently in the country. And this normalization of this is the banality of evil. The judges also have talked about artistic freedom and cultural integrity. Art and satire are vehicles of cultural reflection and critique. These are the words of the Supreme Court judges. Cumulative voice, of course, spelled out by Justice Oka. Protecting them upholds a society's intellectual and moral vitality. Poems, they are legitimate expressions, and this echoes the Martha Nussbaum's view that art fosters empathy and critical thinking. And labeling poems as cheap, sadak sharp, there's a question of subjectivity in legal interpretation. And the Solicitor General, not so sorry, previously I might have told him Advocate General. The Solicitor General, Mr. Tushar Mehta, was dismissal of the poem as sadak sharp. But that's not the reason to have cases of enmity imposed and provision section 196 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita on any person. There could be subjectivity with regard to your taste, and you can consider certain things as distasteful, but that should not cloud objective legal analysis. There's a very important principle of legal philosopher of US. He was also an expert on US Constitution, Ronald Dawkins. And in his work, Critique of Law as Integrity, he has said that the laws, the interpretation of the laws through principled coherence, not personal preferences, so that you can have objective legal analysis. The judges must do it through principled coherence with other aspects of the Constitution and legality. This biasness, personal preferences, whether this is tasteful or disdain, it is insipid, having lack of taste, it is sort of sharp, it is cheap. That's not for you to decide. That's not for anyone to decide. But you have to look at it from the provisions of the laws. Violation of rights of others should not happen. And you should not unnecessarily uh, take away the reputation of others. That's also a crime in India. Bringing disrepute to others, defamation, is a criminal offense in our country. It's a civil offense in many European countries, but defamation is a criminal offense. Of course, that is wrong, but that needs to be analyzed properly to what degree it is happening. And there's also a very important reference in the article, which is of importance, and you must pick these things up. When a Supreme Court judgment comes, you should have a close reading of it. Will give you a lot of important content for your GS2 and GS4 in general, for essays and your interviews. Overall, will enrich your education level if you read the Supreme Court judgment properly. In this judgment, there's another mention of cultural memory. And the judges have invoked historical figures like Gandhi to contextualize the speech, and that underscores the ethical weight of cultural memory. This aligns with the concept of Kwame Anthony Mapia's concept of rooted cosmopolitanism, where universal rights are enriched by local histories. When you align the rights of certain kinds with the local histories, for example, the freedom struggle of India, that contextualization develops a cultural memory and added motivation and effort to protect the rights of people. And that's a good way, that's a good social force that comes in to protect the rights. And then let's talk about reasonable, strong minded standards. And here I was telling you in this context, the judges have said that the restriction on freedom of speech must be reasonable. And restriction should not take away the right itself, it should not be that restricted. In the Habermas ideals of the public sphere, the same concept comes in the legal philosophy, where the rational discourse sustains democratic legitimacy. So the restriction on the freedom of speech and expression should not be of that great extent that you are restricting the rational discourse and you are eroding this public spheres concept where people come for debates and discussion, for maybe arguments as well. And through those debates and discussions and arguments and criticism and critical thinking, finally some consensus are developed. Some common basic ideas are developed that becomes the standards of society. So the observation in the article is very strong, very, very strong. The individual liberty cannot be overshadowed by the insecurities of some sections or even of majority. And that's one of the point that has been in the sphere of judgment from 2019 in Shabrimala case or in the Triple Talaq case. Supreme Court has given importance to individual liberty. Because in the preamble, you see the first promise that the Constitution makes to the citizens is justice. At second position, you have liberty, then equality, and then fraternity. So liberty in that order of preferences has a higher ranking. So liberty of the individuals have to be protected. That's the ethos of Constitution. And the court noted a society that silences dissent risk moral atrophy. Atrophy means becoming weak, losing the vitality, eventually dying. So moral atrophy, morality becoming weak. And in the first article, we have understood if that is becoming weak and you're failing to comply with it, then you're doomed, you're destined towards chaos. That's the end of institutions, end of society, end of life. So we have to work with the principle that is central to Amartya Sen's vision of justice as plural grounding. There must be a lot on your table, and you should take time. Go through the PPT, draw out the content, the terms and phrases, memorize them, many of them, write them down to bring that into your muscle memory. So only then it is going to be useful, and only then you're going to translate it into the answer elsewhere, and that's going to benefit you overall in the final exam.